Ladies and gentlemen, Asian guy here, stop what you're doing. Turn off the news. I need you to understand something that happened in the last 48 hours that the mainstream media is either ignoring or fundamentally misunderstanding. This isn't about real estate. This isn't about nationalism. This is about the controlled demolition of the European economic project. Trump just made a move on Greenland. And with that single chess piece, he didn't just threaten Denmark. He put a knife to the throat of Europe's $1.7 trillion trade architecture. The EU just woke up to discover that their entire Arctic strategy, their energy independence, their rare earth supply chains, their shipping routes to Asia, everything they've built over the past decade to reduce dependence on American hegemony, can be turned off like a light switch. But here's what they're not telling you. This isn't improvisation. This is the execution of a strategy that was locked and loaded before he even took the oath. Someone did the math. Someone looked at the European balance sheet and found the pressure point. And that pressure point isn't in Berlin or Brussels. It's in a frozen island that most people couldn't find on a map. Let me explain what just broke. The European Union spent the last 4 years building what they called strategic autonomy. It sounds boring. It sounds bureaucratic. But what it really means is they were trying to escape the dollar trap. They were trying to build trade flows that didn't require American permission. The centerpiece of this plan was the Arctic corridor. Greenland sits at the heart of that corridor like a cork in a bottle. When the ice melts, and it is melting faster than anyone predicted, Greenland becomes the gateway to trillions of dollars of trade between Europe and Asia. The Northern Sea Route cuts shipping time from Europe to China by 2 weeks. 2 weeks doesn't sound like much until you realize that global trade runs on just-in-time logistics. 2 weeks is the difference between profit and bankruptcy for entire industries. The Europeans thought they were clever. They've been quietly building relationships with Greenland for years. Investment deals, infrastructure projects, cultural exchanges. They thought they could build a highway around American financial control. They were wrong. 3 weeks ago, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen signed a preliminary agreement with Greenland as government for expanded mining rights. Rare earth minerals, the elements that power every electric vehicle, every wind turbine, every solar panel in the European green transition. 2 weeks ago, the Danish government announced they were fast-tracking icebreaker construction to support year-round shipping through Greenlandic waters. This wasn't about sovereignty. This was about infrastructure. They were building the physical backbone of post-American trade. 1 week ago, Chinese state-owned enterprises quietly acquired minority stakes in 3 Greenlandic mining operations. Not majority stakes, just enough to get a foot in the door, just enough to signal that the Arctic wasn't going to be an exclusively Western playground. With acquisition, he made an offer that wasn't really an offer. He made a threat that wasn't really a threat. He reminded Europe that their entire Arctic strategy depends on American goodwill. The markets understood instantly. European shipping stocks cratered within hours. Maersk, the Danish shipping giant, lost $8 billion in market cap in a single trading session. The euro dropped against the dollar. But these are just the surface ripples. The real damage is happening in the shadow economy of long-term contracts and strategic planning. Every European CEO who was banking on Arctic trade routes is now back to the drawing board. Every logistics company that invested in cold weather infrastructure is looking at stranded assets. Every government that promised their voters energy independence through Arctic resources is explaining why that promise just became worthless. But this goes deeper than trade routes. This goes to the heart of the European project. The EU wasn't just trying to diversify their supply chains. They were trying to diversify their monetary system. The Arctic corridor was supposed to be the testing ground for euro-denominated trade, a way to settle massive commodity transactions without touching the dollar system. Think about the implications. If you can ship rare earths from Greenland to Germany and settle the transaction in euros, you've just created a dollar-free trade loop. If Chinese manufacturers can ship finished goods to European consumers through the Arctic and price everything in yuan or euros, you've just bypassed the American financial surveillance state. This is why Trump's move is so devastating. He didn't just threaten to buy Greenland, he reminded everyone who really controls global shipping lanes: the US Navy, American satellites, American GPS systems, American insurance companies. The entire infrastructure of global trade runs through American choke points, and Greenland just became the biggest choke point of all. The Europeans are in panic mode right now. Behind closed doors, finance ministers are scrambling to calculate the cost of Plan B. There is no Plan B. They put all their eggs in the Arctic basket, and Trump just grabbed the basket. Look at the numbers. The EU projected that Arctic shipping would handle 15% of Europe-Asia trade by 2030. That's roughly $250 billion in annual cargo flow. The rare earth deposits in Greenland were supposed to supply 30% of European green energy infrastructure. The fishing rights alone were valued at $50 billion over the next decade. All of that is now contingent on American approval. Not Danish approval, not Greenlandic approval, American approval. Because even if Denmark maintains nominal sovereignty, everyone understands who really calls the shots when the US president announces acquisition intentions on Truth Social. But there's something even more sinister happening here. The timing isn't coincidental. Trump made this announcement exactly 72 hours before the EU was supposed to finalize their 2025 Arctic strategy document, a comprehensive plan for European dominance of polar trade routes. That document is now worthless paper. He also made this announcement exactly 1 week before the EU-China Strategic Partnership Summit, a meeting where European leaders were planning to formalize the Arctic corridor as an alternative to traditional shipping routes. That meeting is now a negotiation about how to manage American displeasure. The Europeans thought they could play the long game. They thought they could build alternative power structures while America was distracted. They underestimated the institutional memory of American empire. Someone in Washington has been watching every Arctic move. Someone compiled every contract, every investment, every diplomatic overture. And when the time was right, they activated the Trump card. This is financial warfare dressed up as real estate acquisition. The Europeans spent 4 years trying to build economic independence. Trump just reminded them that independence is an illusion when your critical infrastructure exists at the mercy of American strategic tolerance. The Chinese are watching this carefully. They've been building Arctic capabilities, icebreakers, research stations, mining partnerships. They thought they could use Greenland as a bridge to European markets. Now they're realizing that bridge has a toll booth, and America sets the toll. But the Chinese aren't panicking like the Europeans. They have alternatives. The Belt and Road Initiative, Central Asian corridors, African partnerships. The Chinese economy doesn't depend on Arctic access the way European green transition does. The Europeans, on the other hand, painted themselves into a corner. They committed to carbon neutrality by 2050. They committed to strategic autonomy from America. They committed to reduced dependence on Russian energy. All of these commitments required Arctic resources and Arctic shipping. Trump just held up a mirror and showed them how dependent they really are. The markets are starting to understand the implications, not because the technology doesn't work, but because the supply chains just became unreliable. German industrial giants are quietly reaching out to American suppliers they thought they would never need again. French shipping companies are dusting off traditional routes. Italian energy firms are recalculating their green transition costs. This is the controlled demolition of European strategic autonomy, not through military force, not through economic sanctions, through the simple reminder that geography is destiny and America controls the geography that matters. The European Union spent decades building institutions designed to constrain American power. They created the euro to challenge dollar dominance. They built swift alternatives to reduce financial dependence. They developed independent defense capabilities to reduce military dependence. But they forgot that all systems depend on physical resources moving through physical space. And physical space, especially frozen oceans and strategic minerals, ultimately belongs to whoever has the biggest navy and the most satellites. The irony is devastating. The European green transition, the project that was supposed to make them environmentally independent, requires minerals and shipping routes controlled by the country they were trying to become independent from. Trump didn't have to threaten tariffs. He didn't have to impose sanctions. He didn't have to withdraw from treaties. He just had to remind everyone who draws the maps. And in the Arctic, America draws the maps. The Europeans are now facing an impossible choice. They can abandon their Arctic strategy and accept permanent dependence on American supply chains. Both choices are losses. If they abandon the Arctic, they abandon strategic autonomy. If they proceed with the Arctic, they proceed at American discretion. Either way, the dream of an independent European economic sphere just died in the ice. The Chinese understand this calculation. They're already moving assets, quietly. Carefully, they're building alternative routes that don't require American permission. The Europeans don't have that luxury. They're trapped by their climate commitments and geography. This is what empire looks like in the 21st century. Not occupation, not colonization. Control of the choke points, control of the supply chains, control of the routes that connect production to consumption. Because in a world where climate change opens new shipping lanes and reveals new mineral deposits, whoever controls the Arctic controls the next phase of global development. The Europeans thought they could escape the American empire by going north. They thought the Arctic was big enough for multiple powers. They thought ice and distance would protect them from American reach. They were wrong. The $1.7 trillion trade pact that was supposed to anchor European economic independence is now a hostage to American Arctic policy. Every contract depends on American tolerance. Every investment depends on American approval. This is how economic dominance really works. Not through direct control, but through the threat of control. Not through ownership, but through the option to own. The Europeans will now spend the next decade asking permission for projects they thought they could execute independently. And the most terrifying part? This was probably just the opening move. If Trump can freeze European Arctic strategy with a Truth Social post about Greenland, imagine what he can do when he actually starts negotiating. The Europeans thought they were playing chess. Trump just reminded them they're playing checkers on a board he owns. The game was over before it started. Watch the Arctic. Watch the shipping lanes. Watch the mineral rights. Because what happens in Greenland doesn't stay in Greenland. It reshapes everything. Trump's Greenland strategy. The end of European strategic autonomy. We are witnessing the controlled demolition of a 70-year-old European project in real time. The European Union was not just building trade routes. They were constructing an alternative to American financial hegemony. This represents the architecture of global power for the next 50 years. Trump demonstrated that American empire operates on a fundamentally different level than everyone else. While Europeans were negotiating contracts, Americans were redrawing maps with social media posts. The timing reveals everything about this new power dynamic. 3 weeks into Trump's presidency, he has already reshaped global trade flows without firing a shot. He needed neither Congress nor the UN, just a Truth Social account and the implicit threat of the world's most powerful military. Every strategic resource on the planet now faces potential American control. If America can claim Greenland to control Arctic shipping, nothing stops them from targeting other choke points like the Suez Canal, Strait of Hormuz, or Panama Canal. The global supply chain has become a game board where every piece is now in play. Europeans built their entire post-2008 recovery strategy on American tolerance. They believed they could quietly build alternatives to dollar dominance while reducing military dependence on NATO. This calculation proved catastrophically wrong. China is taking careful notes on how easily America can freeze European ambitions. They are recalculating every Belt and Road project that touches American spheres of influence. Geography has become weaponized in ways that transcend traditional military thinking. The European green transition, digital sovereignty, and financial independence all run through choke points that America can close at will. This is economic warfare in the digital age. No armies or invasions required, just credible threats over civilization-critical resources. European assets will trade at permanent discounts until they resolve their strategic dependence. European citizens who were promised energy independence and economic sovereignty will pay the price. They face higher costs for energy, technology, and raw materials because their leaders bet on the wrong geopolitical horse. The game changed while Europeans played checkers and America played three-dimensional chess across multiple continents. European leaders must now salvage their Arctic strategy without admitting total dependence on American goodwill. They must explain to voters that strategic autonomy was always an illusion. This represents how empire works when geography is digitized but resources remain stubbornly physical. The most terrifying aspect is that this was probably America's gentlest possible lesson. Greenland is empty, peaceful, and doesn't fight back. Future lessons about strategic autonomy may occur in less quiet classrooms. The Arctic Ice Age of American hegemony is just beginning, and winter is coming for anyone who thought they could build alternatives to American power.